Yeah, it does feel like I'm a little bit ahead.
That's
That's
fine.
funny.
That's
That's
fine.
funny because I'm used to hearing all three of them clapping in relatively off sync.
It's hypersonic, well, hyper fast latency. It's
Yeah.
negative latency. Anyways, welcome to the PARAcast. I'm your host, Moss the Boss Fernandez. Joining me by himself, the new face of Tapatio Hot Sauce, Robert Wyatt. Uh,
Hot sauce.
Everyone else is Steve's in Hawaii, or what? Yeah, and then Kenny couldn't make it. He couldn't do his class and drive home and still make it within an hour. So he can't.
Kenny
It
Kenny
can't be
gets worn
helped.
out. He gets worn out easy. He's a tender little guy. I mean, he's still got beat up in school.
Yeah. Well, he gets home. He turns on the bath. He gets his hot cocoa. He plumps a couple marshmallows in the water, a couple marshmallows in the hot cocoa, and then uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then just sits there and drifts away and
And he's like,
gets.
Vanessa, where's my rubber ducky?
Who used all the lavender bathwash?
Calgon, take me away.
Well, good news though, because there's a division for people who are
Who are overly sensitive.
who are overly sensitive. We have it for you this week. Anyways, yeah. So I've been really busy at work. I got kind of a hell week, kind of crap day week at work. But anyways, so I haven't really done much. I loaded some ammunition, but that's not worth mentioning really at all. But anyways, let's talk about what you did real quick, and then we'll answer some questions. See, now it's just going to be kind of a quicker episode this week.
So I had my new shooters match.
Okay.
That was fun. We had 10 people show up, and they all seemed to have a good time. Some of them showed up to the Slipsa match, which I went and shot on Saturday, and I did okay. I had what was it, 3 mics and a no shoot, which were all like avoidable errors, and that kind of just annoys me for doing that. But
Like
it's
over transitioning, under transitioning, straight up, just
they
not dot.
shooting on the move did not give enough attention to did not give enough attention to the target. So because I'm on the move, so I'm walking and chewing bubble gum at the same time, and I shoot at the target, but my eyes are clearly looking for that next target that I got to move over to.
Yeah.
And for me this is a known thing that I've known that it's an issue, and I've been working on it, but it's hard for me because I have such a small place to dry fire that short of like I'm kind of hoping that the weather's going to actually start being nice to us pretty quick here, so I can just get out in my backyard and practice there.
I
But
tangent real quick. How weird is it to? Because I've kind of ran into this problem myself. It's like I have a backyard and I have a big enough backyard to really run around in. The problem is that I have a house behind me and a house to the sides of me. So like running around with the gun does not seem to be kind of a thing I can do. But I do have blue guns that I could sit there and use to go do that and use with stage movement. But how weird is it now when you want to use a blue gun, but you got a dot on your gun? It feels very weird. And I've thought about it a few times, is um, creating a almost, if you could have somebody create a way to embed a steel insert into a blue gun so that you could take a dot and mount it on top of it.
I think you could do that pretty easy, actually.
Yeah,
That wouldn't be hard at all.
it would be the mold. Yeah, it'd be the molds and doing it. So I've often thought about uh, kind of getting into that so you could have it, or at least something that would literally, if most of these dots come with Picatinny rail mounts, you could literally take the top half of a Glock and then drop it even lower because it doesn't have any
Right.
functioning parts, and just put a pick rail in there, and then you could use your standard Picatinny base for most of your optics and just plug that in there so you could dry fire with a dot.
Well, here's something to consider. I mean, just going off of that, I mean, I'm actually being kind of serious about but if you're running around in your backyard with a gun, what is the likelihood a normie is going to know the difference between a blue gun that's clearly fake and a real gun? And if they're inclined to call the cops on you, the cops are going to come over anyway, and it's not against the law. So you're gonna be like, I was just dry fire practicing in my backyard, and that's
Well,
life.
well, the issue is that like so you have your unloaded weapon, right, and you're running around, and then you're like pointing it at the fences where these dry fire targets would be, and then beyond the dry fire the fence there, you're pointing a gun at people's homes, and so I think that's where the big distinction comes along, and like and it's still it's not good firearms handling practice, which is kind of weird because like the difference between good firearms handling practice is like I'm pointing it at their house anyway. It's just that there's a wall
Well, yeah,
between.
and that's the funny thing, right? Because we're honoring all of the proper safety rules. I mean, the gun's not loaded. We're using fake bullets,
Yeah,
everything like that. Fundamentally, the only difference is that there's blue sky overhead instead of a painted ceiling.
yeah, and so maybe I will just have a. I'll just grab. uh, I'll just buy an extra barrel and slide and just paint them blue.
This works also.
Maybe I'll just do that, and so your backup's blue. That's how you tell the parts apart. But sorry for sidetracking. You go ahead.
No, no, it's good, but no, it's just the nicest thing about shooting right now is I've sort of turned all these local matches into a bit of a practice session. I can't remember who talked about it. It was Rob Epifanina or somebody like that. It's like, I just use all my dry fire. It was on Manny Talks, but I used all my local matches as practice, and I'm like, that's a really good idea. And so I've been working with John and Yemin just in dry fire practice, and I took a lot of data out of that match that I can
Mhm.
hopefully like pull into my next matches and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to like what do you call it? Look on the sunny side of life and say,
Yeah.
okay, here's the things that went wrong. I still took sixth out of like a bazillion people. Like everybody's shooting carry optics, but I think when you're and okay, this sounds really weird for me to say it this way, but when you're at a low level, like C and D and stuff like that, you you look at your matches and you're like, "Damn, I am really good. I did so awesome." And then it seems to me like the higher you get in the score, you just start nitpicking every single thing you did wrong. And then somebody points out something else you did wrong, like who's at a higher level than you, and then you nitpick that. And so it's never good enough. You always see something that you could do better.
Well, it's also like the improvement mindset because there's plenty of people who are BCs and Ds that are really kind of analyzing what's happening
Yeah.
that to try to get better. But for a lot of people, when you're getting closer to the top, like that's all you can do. It's like
Yeah.
what else can I do to sit there and get better because I'm getting not so much that you're getting beat, but you're not producing the times in which you thought you should. So
Yeah.
I did dry fire a couple times, try to do a couple 15-minute times, and that was kind of the things I was working at. My bedroom's kind of spacious, and I have enough room to kind of um, jaunt around. So if I
Yeah.
want to take 4 steps one direction, 4 steps another direction, I can. Um, but I was kind of working on that and kind of doing out of that Charlie Perez book was really watching the transitions from the lower body and staying behind the dot like not overswinging it. And so it's like I have enough space that I can actually put um, 2 targets that simulate 15-yard
Mhm.
targets, but in real life I can space those 12 feet apart. 15 feet apart, and so I can kind of make those transitions into like a V walking towards one and then swooping over and shooting another one. So I will
Yeah.
be I will be shooting a match probably next week. I told myself that I would shoot a couple matches before Jared Stepp's police academy training, not a cop match. I'll go out there and try to do that. So
So another thing, I finally got my slide back from ATEI that I sent them a year ago to cut the optic on, and
so
you
so
can see here that they clearly did not cut the optic because
okay.
yeah, don't worry though, it only took them a year to figure this out. So apparently ATEI cannot cut the optic for an SRO. They can, however, put a compact sight on there, and I'm like, and so they told me this, and I'm like, okay, okay. I mean, I understand. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, there's this other company called Patriot Defense who is already doing this. So what's going on? And I didn't ask them that.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, can you guys just ship me the stuff back? They're like, sure, no problem. And so I paid $43 to have them ship it back. And in the process of that, they shipped it back, which is very kind of them, and I'm grateful for that. But they failed to send back any of the parts to the slide.
Okay, so
So
you sent pretty much a completed slide to them.
I sent them a completed slide
They can't
minus the barrel.
they can't do the work.
They can't do the work.
They send you back a slide without the parts inside of it.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's great.
That's lovely. So I call them back up and now look, they're very kind. So they searched around the shop, they found the parts, and they threw them in the mail, no problem in the world. It's just it took a year to figure this out, which it's fine. Like when I sent it to them, I knew going in that they were going to have to kind of like specially like set up their CNC to do it, and so I wasn't overly concerned. I already have two SROs on slides. This was just going to be a backup to the backup of the backup. A backup to the backup technically, because you have the
Yep.
first and the second and the third, but it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, I'm willing to wait because it would be interesting to see what a direct mounted optic would actually be, if it would be a little bit closer or if you'd even notice a difference.
Yeah.
But now I'm in the position of having a return slide with nothing on it. So I know for a fact I'm going to be getting a hold of Patriot Defense and just I'm using the box that they sent it to me, and I'm just going to turn around and send it right back, send it to Patriot Defense, because Yi Min knows the folks there and said that he'd kind of give me a soft intro and help me get that set up. So we'll see what happens, but it's kind of fun, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of fun. The one thing that was a little bit weird on some of those is kind of like the websites that you interface with to kind of place your order
Mm-hmm.
on stuff. And so when I was looking at having my Glock done, that was one of the big things that I went over to JagerWorks, because it was kind of a very non-screw up, non-thing on the bottom. I mean, if they say that, hey, we're going to sit there and work on something that's off menu, like, fine. But that's...
Yeah.
If you're going to say something that you can work on something off menu, then be able to work on it off menu. So it's just, that kind of seems pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
That way, a year out and you get less than you returned it.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a good company. It really is. And I'm not sitting here saying anything like negative against them. I wish that I had had the results that I wanted to, but
Yeah.
sometimes that's not the case. And ultimately, they were very kind to get everything sent back. And so I know people who've used them for other projects, like whether it's Glocks or not shadows, but Glocks, M&Ps, things like that. So they're a good company.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say anything negative against them in that regard. But no, that was fun. So beyond that, it's funny, like to shoot that match. I've been the same thing. Like I've had this like horrible week. Like we've got like 5 houses that we had to design and show this week. And it's just, I mean, normally it takes about, I mean, to do one, to go from basically designs to presenting something, you're usually talking about 4 to 5 working days. So it was a bit of a hell week. And that's just, I mean, it's kind of sort of our fault. We backed ourselves into a corner with it, but come Friday night yesterday, I was like, oh crap, I need to load ammo. But I didn't really want to because I was really tired.
Yeah.
So I was like tearing my entire basement. Like I took to the match the grab bag of leftover ammo crap that I had lying around. I'm like, well, there's 200 rounds here. I think we're good to go.
Well, that's funny, because I've been walking out and loading 500 or 600 ever so often, just walking out there and just the press is running fine, so I'm just doing it. So I'm to the point that I'm probably one more session, 500, 600 rounds from running out of my capacity. Well, my 1,000 round 30 cal bins capacity of filling that up. I could go through all the 100 round bins and start filling that stuff up with ammo, but we'll see what happens with that. Anyways, what's going to happen next is we're going to answer your questions after we talk about Dominate Defense. I'm wearing one right now. Best belts in the industry. Get their Mach 1 speed belt and their carry belt's fantastic. DominateDefense.com. Use promo code PARA10. Also, check out Gallant Bullets. Use promo code PUPRO10. Save 10% off your order. And Precision Holsters Fast Holster. Use promo code PARA10 and save 10% off the finest competition holster. I constantly think just to get my M&P dotted, just so I could, because I honestly like that holster a whole lot. And so either using that or running the Glock, but someone has a question about that. So anyway, we'll get there.
All right. Let's start this thing off. There's a lot of talk about 2011s in carry optics. What's your take? If this keeps going, do divisions even matter? Should we just go to irons and optics?
Well, here's what. So I heard this, and then I was like, okay, well, I want to talk about it on the show tomorrow, so let me do some web searching and figure out exactly what's going on. So I head on over to the USPSA website. Can't see anything on there. I didn't see any news or announcements. I checked the rule book. The rule book says updated 2021, so it can't possibly be in that. I went through my email. I didn't really see anything in my email saying that there was a new provisional division. And so technically all I have is a text from Robert saying they're going to do a 2011 carry optics. So what's the scuttlebutt?
Well, let's use this as an analogy, if you will. Say you're a company that makes weapons and weapon systems. For the sake of conversation, let's call that company Raytheon.
Okay.
Now, what do you do if like your biggest client suddenly stops the war that they had for 20 years? You can't have that because, I mean, you're going to lose money.
Oh yeah, I mean the best thing to do is to take any minor conflict that comes around and do like try to intensify the situation.
Exactly. And so Raytheon's like, hey, we've got this little thing over here in Russia. They're not really happy with each other. What if we just go and like start some shit and then we could like make a shitload of money? And so if you take that same analogy, we could then call it this company, I don't know, say Infinity. So maybe there's a company called Infinity and they're like, how do we sell more guns to people? Well, all the people that have bought our iron sight of guns, they're starting to shoot carry optics. Well, that's not good because our entire market is built around the idea that we're selling these limited guns. What if we pay USPSA to make a brand new division? Well, we can't do that because that wouldn't work. Well, all we have to do is get the director of marketing. What's his name again? Make Jartins. Make Jartins. That's right. That's his name. Make Jartins. We'll do a podcast and we'll say that we're going to go and like create this whole new division, and Make Jartins will be like, hey, this is a great idea. You know what? Since I'm the director of marketing, I'm going to establish policy for all of USPSA. And what I'm going to do is tell everybody that we're going to make a new division. But problem is, there's all these guys in the background. We call them the board of directors. Board of directors like, wait, what the fuck, bro? We have to vote on this. And Make Jartins is like, no, bro, no, trust me. I'm the guy. I'm totally the guy.
Well, the other part, it's like there's probably got to be a pretty decent check in that. Like, remember when it was, and this is kind of funny, and you used to make fun of this too, where it was like IDPA and Wilson Combat. Like Wilson Combat would do something and then they get slap it on there. IDPA seems to be much more rigid in what they allow in and how rigid the divisions are than USPSA at this point.
Yeah, except for, I mean, now was it IDPA suddenly, or Wilson Combat came out with an AIWB holster? Oh, surprise! It's suddenly loud.
We're going that direction. Well,
so, I mean, that's kind of the funny thing. I mean, so basically,
it's an AW, it's a appendix inside the waistband appendix holster, right? That at least within, if you change the rules, it would be legal within the rules, not creating a whole other division to fit something into it.
Right. So what happened was they had this USPSA podcast and they said, oh, we're going to like make this thing and it's going to be a provisional division. The problem with their provisional division is it still has to be voted on by the board of directors. Yep. The board of directors didn't know anything about this, or maybe they knew something about it, but it's still the point that Jake went and got way out over his skis and said, oh yeah, we're totally going to do this. There's a problem here. It's because the board still has to vote on it. But he basically tried to do an end run around the board, and now he's going to try and put public pressure like via Facebook and social medias and write your board director. But fundamentally, what does this mean? You basically have a bunch of people who shoot three gun who are like, boy, if I could come over and shoot my carry optic single action only 2011 in three gun or in USPSA, I would totally shoot USPSA. I pinky promise. In fact, I got a buddy who has a flashlight. He said he'd come shoot if you guys changed the division, and you guys did, so you owe me big time. That's how it works.
Well, they might come and shoot it. I mean, that's possible if you open it up that they might come and shoot it. The fact is, does USPSA need a freaking what, ninth division?
Well, you know what? Shocker of all shockers, we've got a division already set up for them. We call it open.
Oh yeah, but that's too racy for what they want to do with
it wouldn't
it.
be competitive. We can't shoot competitively with our Gucci gear because, I mean, nothing says inclusivity like a $7,000 carry optic single action only 2011.
Well, that's because they're too poor to buy an open gun, Robert. Don't you see the logic in that? Like they can spend $4,000 on it. Well, here's the other part. So you got Infinity making these things. You got sorry, not STI. I'm so sorry. Staccato.
Atlas.
You have Staccato. You have Atlas. You have
Atlas would stand to gain from this.
What is there's a couple other smaller companies that are making 2011 type frame.
Bull Armory makes some really nice
Yes,
one.
that's the
Infinity. Golly, I can't think of all the
Rock Island
companies.
Armory makes sets like that, and so there's a lot of companies that are out there producing these things. The fact is, do we need another division for it? Like this is the kind of thing that kind of gets me. Like there's the two arguments, right? The two arguments is like, well, what's the real difference? And of course, in the grand scheme of life, like, what's the real difference between a striker fired a double single and a single action handgun being in the same division? Okay, but and so that's like the wide parameter look at the situation.
Mm-hmm.
The narrow parameter thing is like we are competitively shooting pistols. So the difference in our sport of shooting the pistols is a big deal because if we have such wide parameters, then we actually need no divisions at all. And so it's like, how do we currently select the parameters? It's like aiming devices, power factor, and capacity, and now we're getting into the territory of really action types to determine very, very broad things. And so it's like I am more permissive to the idea of having a single action guns and carry optics than I am having another division on the road.
Right, and I think I'm right there with you. I
think primary stance is no and no.
Right.
But after that,
well, from my perspective, I don't think it matters. I mean, if you bring a single action only carry optic gun, it just doesn't to me. I mean, you have the guy who won limited did it with the striker fire gun last year in nationals. So the guns have gotten to a point right now where they're just so good that they're basically the same gun, whether it's striker fire or single action only or whatever. But what bothers me more than anything is if the story is to be true, and I understand it to be so, that you have the director of marketing essentially establishing policy for the organization without even going through the board of directors, who ultimately are responsible for creating the policy in the first place. And that's a problem. The second thing that bothers me is we've now established this idea that if you're a company and you have enough money and are willing to throw it in terms of a sponsorship, then you too can go and buy a division to sell more guns.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like it. Well, and that's the other thing is you take it from the company's perspective of what they used to have in, let's say, Infinity, for example, what they used to have in limited gun sales and open gun sales are probably disappearing to companies the much bigger companies with their $1,000 carry optics ready guns, and even guns that are sub that, and seeing all the growth that's in there. So it's like
Right.
you would almost, instead of having your own division, you would almost want to shoehorn it into the carry optics division, just so that you can basically have that whole bigger market, everyone going like, well, I can't shoot this Glock anymore. I can't shoot this CZ anymore. I can't shoot this gigantic Beretta. Now I
Mhm.
have to go to. Well, I got 60 ounces to play with, so let's go get a 5.5 inch, 59 ounce, biggest non-realistic gun they could have. Yeah, and the other part is like, yeah, buying spots. Like, and that's one of the things. Like, as the main marketing person, like your job is to sit out there and grow the sport and get as many people as you can into it.
Mhm.
And so that's a fine line of telling people what you're willing to, telling people that you'll do something that is outside of your power. But as the marketing director, it should be, if you think it's actually going to grow the sport, would be the first thing that you would bring up to the board.
Right. And Jake, I mean, I have to respect Jake because I mean, when this whole Foley thing was going down, he had to do a lot of work to keep everything going. I
Yep.
mean, he really did have to step up. And so I can be upset about this particular situation and still I think it is fair to recognize that he was tasked with doing somewhat of a Herculean effort to keep things going. And so I would be unfair not to at least acknowledge that. I don't like the idea of creating a brand new division because a company came with a bunch of money and said, "Please, sir, give us more." Because to me, it's the same thing as Raytheon just trying to get themselves a new war.
Yep. Well, and that's it's like getting MiG 29s. Yeah, to full. It's like, hey, I'll tell you what. What's the one guy who's sitting there part of the industrial military complex, like, yeah, you give them all their old stuff that we never paid for because it's old Soviet stuff, and then the United States military funds us resupplying their entire air force at
Was
once.
the Polish? The United States says, "Hey, Poland, do you guys want to go give them all this stuff, and we'll backfill you?" And Poland's like, "F you, we're not getting in the middle of this war.
Well, they were like
You
they
guys
were
go
like
do it."
they were like, sure, we'll do it. We'll send them over to Germany. It's like, well, Germany's farther away. But if we do it, we don't want to do it. So,
Yeah,
so like, if basically, if it came down to this, is like, if this was a plausible thing that they could get away with, is like, hey, Poland, burn all your MiG 29s and we'll give you a whole new air force, but you're gonna burn them, and then put in support of Ukraine on a big like banner on the bottom of it. And like, if
yeah.
that would have passed test, they would have been like, yes, in support of Ukraine, we're burning all these MiG 29s because they're Russian made. So
I just love the fact that right now we have all of these politicians in the United States that are just doing their damnedest to get us into war.
well, the one thing is like, you can't even like, Thomas Massey seems to be the only sane guy on earth.
Yeah,
Thomas Massey's like, well, if we ban the oil, our oil prices will go up, and it doesn't really hurt because he can just sell it somewhere else, and most likely it's going to go through a third party, and we're going to end up buying it anyway. And so
yeah.
that's the one thing, and then we don't need,
I mean, and shocker of all shockers, we could pump our own oil. We
yeah,
could do that.
we could do
But
that.
no, 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 no. We need to buy $60,000 electric cars. Thank you, Mr. Butt Gig.
Well, like, and the other part too is like we're having a budget resolution, and then we're giving a bunch of money over there that has nothing to do with us, settling the budget. So,
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous. But as far as like, you want to take out ads in the magazine, take out ads in the magazine.
Yeah.
But you don't get to sit there and make a whole division or ruin another division. Like, I don't know. It's the sport is getting more and more watered down as it goes along. I mean, if you want to do something like that, then let's. I'm not saying take an axe to another division, but
No,
it.
I think that's actually a really fair point. If you want to add a division, you have to take one away. That's like a law. Like if we create a law, then you have to go and eliminate a law.
Yeah, but
Except in the case of the United States, you have to eliminate 100.
I think the only one that actually makes sense to eliminate is L10. Because that's just basically a state's rule, and most people don't do it anyway. But honestly, if you're in a state that has limited magazine capacity, you should actually probably practice your local matches to that capacity. And
Yeah.
I only say that just for a major match rule that other competitors go into your state that they are abiding by the laws of the state, not because I like the laws of the state, but just so people don't go there thinking if we got rid of L10 that they could have limited, and some guys are competing with the 10 round magazines that they're legally allowed to have, and other guys are literally competing with high
Well,
capacity magazines.
the hard thing with that, I mean, if you push back on that a little bit, would be you have people who live in, say, like New Jersey, and New Jersey has their magazine restrictions, but they're close enough to the border of other countries that they can just travel into those other countries where those countries are free, and they can go and shoot high cast. But as soon as they come back to
Yeah.
the communist hellhole that they live in, they're obviously restricted. And so,
Well, then, you
do you
just
kind of like set that up? I mean, I don't know how that works for those
well,
poor people.
no, you make a division called L10.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's the kind of answer about that. But there's not really a division that I could sit there and think about. Like, there's like fun things to talk about discontinuing, like Revolver and L10 and PCC and all that stuff. But honestly, like every division kind of has its niche. So the only way to make it, e- the only way you could either sandwich those types of guns is to make carry optics bigger. And
right.
I would say if you're going to allow something like that in carry optics, I think there should be sort of a trade off in carry optics as well.
Yeah, it does. It does feel. I mean, to answer his question, it does feel like we're slowly pushing into this world of irons versus optics.
Well, eventually, like what's going to be the limiting factor? I think if you bring in single action guns, then make the magazine capacity 10.
Yeah,
You could make it you could literally make it sort of like a 10 round optical division, and that would separate it out more from the open division. Because honestly, what's the difference now? There's another question about 140 power factor, but if you did that, then we're all shooting the same division.
literally. All right. Well, next question. Hi, what accessories support your dry fire practice? Any recommendations for books or reading on dry fire?
Uh, so the I've had a few of the books over the time, but the Charles Perez book we actually talked about a couple of weeks ago. I finished that up. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very helpful. So Path of Focused Effort, I believe, is what it's called,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get that from just
Big
type in Charlie Perez, Big Panda.
Big Panda Performance, I think, is what the website was.
Yeah, and so it's actually it's a really no BS and dry fire targets. I think those were kind of the ways to go. Dry fire targets, shot timer book kind of gets you in the right direction, and I think you can make a lot of progress with that. And for that, it's like that's why I still recommend that damn CED timer, just
Yeah.
because of the repetitive mode. So
Yeah. You also Steve Anderson's books
are very good.
are very good. Um, I I have a hard time recommending the Steger books, even though they're good. I think how do I say this without sounding overly critical? It feels to me that Steger wrote one good book, and then the rest of them are just warmed over rehashes of the same thing. And I could be wrong on that. I'm willing to walk that back, but it sort of feels that way.
Um, there are stuff in so the issue is like when you have such a like narrowly defined topic, there's only so many nuances or ways that you can come after it. So if you're going to make 4 or 5 dry fire books, a lot of the books are going to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
Well, and the funny thing is even when you take like a fiction novel that's a sequel of another fiction novel, like a direct, like there's a lot of stuff that's built off of that first one that you kind of have to go into. Like jump into a Marvel movie on like number 4 in like a character series and try and then parse through about how much stuff is taken out of the original that's
Right.
taken from
Right.
the prior books. So
Yeah, and that's why it's like, I mean, I don't know that I. It's like I said, I could be wrong. I could be wrong on it, but that was kind of just some of the things I think about because I've looked through them and I'm like, well, this is basically just saying the same thing that was said. But fundamentally, you could pick up any one of his books, and it's going to be very good information. We have a lot of really good information if you want to pick up books and things like that. But Steve Anderson's is good. I honestly think Charlie Perez's book, talking from a lot of people, Charlie Perez's book this really sounds weird because we just had him on, so it sounds like I'm shilling for him. But Charlie Perez's book is arguably one of the better books on like actual useful data.
it, it's
The
very
other,
it's very good, especially for USPSA centric stuff.
yeah,
Especially when you talk about how to the stage stuff and um, kind of like the fundamental stuff is pretty decent in it too.
Right. I mean, his books aren't so much about use these drills as they are about here's the things you should be thinking about, how you should be setting yourself up. And so if you take that book, if you take his book and then you take like a Steve Anderson book, the two of them combined together, I think you're going to have a very good fundamental platform of where to begin with.
Yep, for
And
sure.
so that's kind of how I look at that. For Mr. Rob Chavis, if USPSA scrapped all divisions and started over, what divisions would make sense to have going forward? Would major minor scoring still be a thing?
So if I had to do it over, and let's say we went for the most minimalist thing, you would do something like 135 power factor ammunition. That is the hit factor. You would have a limited division, and you would have a carry optics division.
No open.
That's in carry optics.
Would you if we went just those two, okay? So would carry optics be a very limited division in the sense that you could only put certain things on the gun, or do we run it like open where you can put comps, magwells, things like that?
If you want it if you wanted a pure competition aspect, then I would say you just take the weight limit that's currently available, and you say uh, no comps, but basically, flashlights, weighted flashlights, magazines, uh, bass brass base pads and stuff like that. Like you could literally do it. Like if I had my own way, then it would just be dot gun and dot gun and like 15 rounds, but it's not my way. So I would just say you take it the way it is. You take your 2011s, you put them into carry optics, and since you have one power factor that's 135 or 140 or whatever you want to say and above, then there's no real need to have the open gun, right? And so, because like technically that gun would just be swung over into
Yeah.
carry optics, and you would basically have 9mm open guns, or except for the slide riding optics thing, of course. But like you would just have that, and then for like your production and your L10 and stuff like that, that would go into just limited. Go compete. Your magazine capacity is the only thing that changes because you're both shooting the same power factor ammo, and then you know, what else do you need? You need a revolver and a PCC just to get other people to show up with it.
Yeah.
And that kind of basically does almost everything except for the single stack guns.
I just thinking off the top of my head, I would create three divisions. I would create irons, open, and carry optics. And I think carry optics would eventually destroy open because I would put a maximum power factor of 140 to 145, which essentially is factory. And
145 on a 9mm is hard to hit, I would say, consistently.
oh, it's probably a plus P round.
Well, it's hard enough that you would have ammunition that would go 147, 144, 143, 148. Like it's very so like the floor. So like even saying like a 140 power factor, like you're on like what would consistently do that? Like Winchester
Oh, that's
White Box
true.
NATO. So you would have to have like a 135 and basically load it
Yeah, you're
consistently
right.
over.
You're right. Okay. Well, then let's just say the max power factor. So the minimum power factor would be 135. The max power. Well, you would. Why would you do? You just say
You would have
minimum.
needed max. Because
Yeah.
technically in production you can have you just like here's your max. It's just like you're not getting any more points.
Yeah.
But you
No,
get
that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, minimum power factor. I would settle on 135. 135 is a good balance because you're not loading them too light, you're not loading them too hot. I mean, I run 138, and I find the gun runs exceptionally well right there. So I don't, and then I can travel around, and I don't ever have a problem with it. Uh, I would probably take, yeah, I think I would. I'd get rid of the, I wouldn't have a, I would definitely have, it would be minor scoring only. I wouldn't do major power factor anymore. That would, admittedly, I think by doing this, I would have angered just about everybody in the entire world because the 40 Smith and Wesson goes away, the shingle shack goes away. I mean, you can still shoot 9mm, but nobody's gonna shoot 45 anymore. if you and revolver, PCC can all fit inside of open, but open runs with the same magazine limits as the pistols, so the PCCs don't get to have their 11 billion rounds in them. Uh, yeah, I think I'd have those 3 divisions,
Yeah.
limited, and really the open for me would just be a catch-all for everything else that didn't actually, and then I would basically turn off any edits for the next 15 years so that people, well, I don't know if I wanna do that. I turn off the edits for a long time so that, you didn't have people being like, "Can you, I have $10,000 and I'll support your nationals match. Would you please make a division just for me?"
Yeah, so the one thing, the kind of funny thing is, like, when we're talking about 2011s and CO, is like how close it becomes to open, and the fact that
Yeah.
the frame mounted optics, the difference is frame mounted optics and comps. So it's
Mhm.
like, like if you had to carry optics and you only had to have like a very handful of divisions, then most likely you'd be like, okay, like, all right, you can have the frame mounted optic on
Right.
there and see how much of a difference that would make.
Well, and if you go over and you listen to that USPSA podcast with the, and I apologize because I don't remember his name, but the guy from Infinity, he makes a lot of really good cases. And then I think Manny had the guy from Supervel on there, but they make a lot of good cases for why we should get rid of major scoring, and especially like 9 major and then 38 super, uh, because it's really hard on the guns. You're basically putting it well above whatever the specs are for using that sort of thing. And I understand where they're coming from on that. And I think there's certainly a valid conversation worth having
Yeah,
for
well,
getting rid of it.
it was kind of like that conversation we had with Adam Reiser, which was like, if they have one power factor or they have different power factors, like why does one need to be major?
Yeah.
Because it looks better.
Hmm.
Like no one like that's if everyone's shooting the same thing, then what does it matter what kind of if it's major or minor scoring factor, power factor. Sorry, hit factor. But anyway, that's kind of funny. It's just like because some people just want it in a division because it makes you feel better in some things. But yeah, 40 calibers going the way of the dinosaur anyway. Open calibers. I mean, I think if everyone could just make a 9 millimeter open gun, they'd be happy with that too.
Well, if you want to see, to me, I wish Kenny was here because to me the argument for major scoring goes away if you take away the scoring. If you say you can shoot a 40 Smith and Wesson, but you're still getting the same amount of
Correct.
points, 40 Smith and Wesson dies overnight. So does all the other made like big calibers,
Yep.
because that's the only reason that you have those things is to get you to a certain power factor. But if that no longer exists, so then to me, it introduces the next question. Are we propping up a dying industry solely for the reason of allowing people to get more points than they would otherwise?
Well, I don't think it's people's idea is not propping up a dying industry. I think what the problem is people don't want to not give a place for what people spent their money on to compete anymore,
You know
right?
what? I totally understand that. I really do.
But the
But
funny
at a
thing
certain
is,
point, flintlocks, they're kind of gone.
the funny thing is too is like when you open up, like no one cared about that when they opened up the weight and added flashlights and then brought in guns into divisions that had no other
Oh yeah.
reason to be in there. So it's like when you make the gun that people are competing with obsolete in their division because of what you've added into that division or the appearance of obsolescence, then it's almost doing the same thing. Like how many times have people changed and bought guns because now, like back in the day in production, it's just like I can't shoot a Glock anymore. I got to shoot a Tanfo or a CZ or something like that. So like, what guns did they make obsolete? Like how many people changed guns and thought their guns as obsolete when they made that change
Yep.
or when those guns came out? Sorry.
All right, from Alex Mansfield. What do you use to help design stages? SketchUp, 3D Stage Builder, paper? Well, if as anybody who has ever seen my stages at the indoor match knows, I use little Post-it notes and I sketch all of my stages out on them. And if you can actually turn that into a working stage, then you're doing really, really well.
What were the
Uh,
stage builder kits? Who made those? Do you remember those?
The 3D printed part things,
Yeah.
those are pretty cool. Those are pretty cool. I think they're expensive for what you get. Expensive is relative in this game. I mean, we spend so much money on all sorts of things. SketchUp is a great program. The reason, but because you can actually do fly-throughs and walkthroughs, whatnot. There's a learning curve to it. There's no doubt about that. But it's a fantastic program for getting accuracy, especially if you have the dimensions of the bay you're working on. In that regard, you can't beat it. I've used it in the past for different stages and things like that. I quite like it. It's just a lot more effort than my limited time usually has to put in. If I didn't have anything to do, I think I really quite prefer SketchUp.
Right on.
Let's see. If you couldn't shoot your current platform anymore, which platform would you shoot?
I don't really have a main platform. Robert holds up a Beretta 92.
Yep. That's not a hard question to answer. I
So,
really quite like that gun.
so I'm shooting a Beretta 92, but if they're like, you can't shoot Beretta 92s anymore, it's like, that's not a big deal for me. Because I shot so much stuff
Hmm.
over the years that it's like, I take away my own preferred platform on a bi-monthly basis.
You
So
do.
it doesn't matter to me. And honestly, I don't see that big of a difference on it.
There's a
So
part of me that kind of wishes you couldn't shoot. I don't really truly mean this, but there's a part of me that wishes you couldn't shoot the same gun in USPSA year after year, so you were forced to change. And I know it's totally impractical, but I've got a safe full of guns that I'm like, I could shoot this in USPSA, and then I never do because I'm like, no, I got a Shadow 2. Why would I change?
well, yeah, that's the way I kind of feel like the way that you felt, but I just kind of do it. It's just like,
Yeah.
what's the point of me buying these things if I don't actually get to run around and play with them? And so it's like there's a bunch of stuff that I find like I absolutely like going out and shooting, like shooting PX4s. I like shooting the Smith and Wessons, and I like shooting the Glocks. And if I'm honest with myself, I'd probably shoot Glocks, a full size Glock, better than probably anything. That and the 92 would be a pretty hard toss up for me to decide which one I actually shoot better. But it's like, why not?
Yeah. I shoot if I am super honest about it, Um, if I'm super honest about it, I shoot the M&P disturbingly well.
Yep.
It's the craziest thing in the world, but that gun in my hands with that specific trigger is probably the best gun that I have ever shot in terms of overall accuracy, which is funny because when I very first shot and held one, I had terrible, awful, awful groups, and I put the gun down and I'm like, nope, this gun is obviously not me for me. I'm going to a Glock. And it was years later that Tommy's like, dude, you shot a 1.0 that had a crappy barrel and you were shooting, I think it was 147s,
Right.
and it couldn't stabilize them.
Yep. I mean, and that's the new ones are so good that
Oh, they're the
it
best.
the new ones are so good and they're so damn cheap. Like it's very hard. And it's often overlooked, especially for like mechanics and stuff like that. Like so,
Yeah, my only complaint about the new one is they listened to the cops when it came to dropping the slide stop. They should never have listened to cops.
yeah, I know. Well, you gotta tug on the back. You gotta make it almost impossible unless you delete some parts out of that gun to use the
Which
damn
which
slide
I
stop.
which I did.
Yeah, it's
And it works. I mean, by doing that, you literally do solve the problem. And so that's fantastic.
yeah. And the only problem that they needed, the only thing that they needed to happen with that 2.0 is it needed to come out after the Gen 5 Glock, so they could have just buffed out the magwell. If it had the magwell of the Gen 5 Glocks, it would have been just in my opinion, probably a perfect product.
I think so. Let's see. Who are you liking for USPSA president? And if you couldn't vote for Yi Min, who's your second pick?
USPSA president, man, how? Let's see if I've even looked into this that much. Probably not.
So I hate to say this, but so there's Steve Moneypenny, there's Matt Hopkins, and I cannot remember the third guy to save my life besides Eamon, but and then Bruce Wells. Yeah, that's about it.
So I was pulling up. I was just looking at this when I was looking at the special election stuff that USPSA has up on its website when I was looking for the Phantom 2011 Carry Optics division. So I don't have enough of an opinion right now to sit there and and tell you who else I would vote for.
So for me personally, um, I like Emin, and so I think he actually has probably the strongest ideology behind himself. But if I couldn't vote for Emin, then my inclination is probably to go with Matt. My biggest this is really hard because I like Matt a lot. I think he's actually a really good dude, but I think he's a better Area 3 director than he would be as a president. And I just think I my there's a concern that Hopkins has, and I don't know if it's a warranted concern or if it's even valid, but there is a concern that Hopkins is not his own man and that Steger is essentially pulling the strings on it. And that's not I don't know that that's entirely fair because I like Matt, but that error is there. And so it's hard because it's like, are we getting Matt Hopkins, who is a good leader and he's done some really good things as far as an area director, or are we getting Ben Steger? And I'm not sure how to handle that. And so I like Matt Hopkins because I really do think he's done some really great things for the sport. I think he's a fantastic person, and he's genuinely an all around good guy. And so he would probably be my vote. Let's see. Next question. If USPSA changes open major power factor 145, how do you think it will affect the division?
Major power factor in the 145.
Yeah. 30. Eric Steiner is going to be a very unhappy person.
Well, well, that kind of makes all the super comp stuff kind of not really needed. The
Yeah.
one thing was too is like you could essentially start allowing coded bullets in the division now,
Mm-hmm.
because they won't explode. you know,
They won't burn up the comps.
going at 1,350 feet or 1,400 feet per second. So yeah, you could sit there and you could do that. That would generally tend to help it, but besides bullet construction, I don't think people are going to dispatch the gear. That you might get more involvement from people shooting 9mm guns and being able to push that 145 limit. So I think that kind of would sit there and help out. I
I
pretty
think
much.
so. I think you'd get a lot of bullets. This is actually what the fellow from Infinity was talking about, and even Supervel um, on Manny's show they were saying that um, it is really hard to develop a factory load in those in that major format, and so you're doing so at great risk because uh, you can actually develop it to run on a certain open gun, but then another guy it'll be too hot, or maybe it's too slow, and so it's really hard when you're trying to push that very specific upper number. But if you put it into the 145 category, that's now in a place where you've got a lot of factory loads. I mean, they're going to be hot loads. Don't get me like plus P's and things like that, but there's still book data on all that stuff. And I think that's actually kind of a smart thing to consider. I could be wrong, but it sure seems like that the two guys who have a bit of a vested interest have made a case that I think is worthy of at least looking into.
Well, you would actually, if you just brought just major power factor down in that way, that would probably help out a lot of the single stack stuff too. I mean, I don't think it helps single stack minor at all. I mean,
No,
I
no.
think if you're that close on the floor and it's 2 rounds capacity, then the 45 people are definitely shooting it at a pace and a comfort level with the recoil that's pretty much closer to that 9mm. I mean, because one thing about 45 ACP is there's a big difference from 145 to 165. That last 20 is substantial in the
Hmm.
amount of perceived felt recoil. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
and so that
Mike Stoker is the guy who owns Supervel. I had to look it up and so I had to say his name, but that's who it is.
yeah, I mean, it would be fun. You'd see a lot of the changes in the open division, the limited division. I think that would be the big jump to 9. I think you start getting 9mm guns, Glock 34s, and other guns of that ilk, and then you start seeing the 24 round magazines in it, and you get the longer barrels. You get a heavier bullet. You start pushing that heavier bullet, especially. It's funny. You get the softer coating in the open guns, and you probably get like a heavier coating to push a harder power factor out of 9 millimeter 5 inch guns
Yeah.
with iron sights and limited. So I think it pretty much. I think it might be a win all the way around. I think it's a win for limited. I think it's a win for single stack, and I think it's a win for open.
Well, Andy Erickson follows up and he says, 10 millimeter is making a big resurgence. What does everyone think of making 10 millimeter minimum caliber for major?
There's people at Double Tap that are praying that you're correct, because I would imagine like, freaking Starline's probably got 155-gallon barrel of like 10 millimeter brass, and then if like 10 millimeter became the standard, how many people would be coming out of the woodwork for that? But technically, that's 40 caliber, right? That's 40 calibers 10 millimeter. So, but yeah, 10 millimeter, like that's like, what's the new power factor? We gone in the other direction. It's 180 bitches. It's a
Yeah.
180 power factor. Glock 20s. They're all
Oh.
coming out of the woodwork.
Last question we've already kind of answered, but I'll read it anyway. It says from Jeff Smith, what are your thoughts on single action only guns and carry optics? Would that destroy an already thriving division or just allow a bunch of expensive 2011s in? Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit, but
Yeah, but I honestly, if I sit there and I look back, I think it'll make it a stronger division.
I do too. I don't see any reason not to allow it. I really don't. I just don't like how it was brought about.
I don't like how it's brought about, and I don't like that it's in there. But like at this point, with the rule set in its current construction, like what's like we've already watered it down so much by weight in which you can attach on the gun, but essentially, what are we doing with the actions?
Yeah.
And so but the problem is, it's like you're making the most popular division even more popular,
hmm
and so
if that's actually a really good point. You are basically killing open and limited faster.
oh, you're killing every other division faster, because you're killing limited faster, you're killing open faster. Production people are going to move over to there because it's the same ammunition, essentially the same guns,
Yeah.
base plates, and an optic, and they're already in there. And so you got revolver, PCC, and then you're going to have basically a carry optics. So it's like, how much carry optics do you want? And it's like, you don't want to limit divisions, but you're de facto going to limit those divisions just by participation rate.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and so, like, honestly, if you can just take a gun over there and just swap it in there, the decent thing about at least the transfer over there is there's not open guns that can migrate over there, and there's not really limited guns that can migrate over there. At least competitive 40 caliber limited guns can't easily migrate into carry optics. But
I'll
you're
tell you
gonna
what. Here's what we'll do. We'll make a compromise. The 2011s, they can shoot and carry optics. They just can't do it with a magwell.
that that's kind of funny, because I'm not sure how most of those guns are actually designed without the magwell embedded in from the factory, because I don't see a lot of them that are flush capped bottomed. So yeah, they would have to get rid of that. Yeah, they would.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine. They can come in there without the magwell. That's perfectly all right. So you'll get an influx of people coming into the division, and it's going to make it very big and competitive division. But there's not going to be much of anything else anywhere else. So
Yeah.
the other part too, it's like, then it gives people who, because there's some people in this sport that just grew up shooting 2011 frames. Me personally, I hate them. I don't like the way they feel. I
They're
don't
not
like
left-hand friendly.
I don't like the way that my thumb interacts with the safety on that side. I don't like how wide they are. I don't really stand for the trigger. Like a 1911, I love, but a 2011, I just can't get around to. So now they have their preferred platform in another division. And so, but here's the other slippery slope is that. So then, what stops it from becoming a production gun?
That's true. Well, I mean, let's just be honest. Production is essentially L10 at this point.
It's getting there, but I wouldn't say that, because it's probably going to see at least 4 times the amount of attends that some L10 or something, but it's going to be very similar to single stack and revolver, which are still good divisions. The problem is like, when you
If
essentially
you take well, if you actually, Tom, if you think about this, if you take away major scoring, production's dead because limited catches production,
Yep.
or limited and production become identical. Other than limited is much more desirable because you can actually shoot full mags.
Yeah, and so the 140 power factor might be the best way of actually consolidating competition in the sport.
Yeah.
And believe me, there's plenty of people who don't want to consolidate the competition in the sport. I'm just saying, is like if you get rid of the kind of double action striker fire rule set that holds in carry optics, then there's no reason to hold it out. And then literally for production, you have the idea of having a gun that you basically took off the shelf and like, look, they sell staccatos at Shields, and they're
Hmm.
in the glass case, and they have $3,900 price tags. But like the idea that we're getting farther and farther away from guns we pick up, and honestly, carry optics was supposed to be that too. Gun
Yeah.
you pick up off the shelf that has a dot, and now it's going to be every division will be a quote unquote race division, and
And
so
maybe that's what we want to do. I mean, I, I don't know that that's the right answer,
I
but
think
maybe that's what we're just doing.
I think it. I think when at that point when everyone shows up for their second or third match and comes out of their new shooter match with their Glock, they are going to feel like they do not fit in the sport when people have that much stuff.
But that's the hard thing though, because you're seeing the people win with plastic fantastics.
Mm-hmm.
And
You are.
so how do you as Infinity or Bull Armory or Atlas Gunworks, whatever, how do you convince people that they need to drop, $4,000 or $5,000 on a gun
Well,
that
how do
is
they how
being
do they
beat?
convince regular people now?
Uh,
Instagram.
yeah.
They just go out there and they just advertise the heck out of it. I listened to a podcast where the guy said like the greatest shooting pistol he's ever shot has was a staccato.
But
Like it's
if you talk to new shooters, and I mean, Tommy, you've been around them for so many years. I mean, people come, they ask you, as a first firearm, what's the best one to get? You're telling them M&P, Glock, Canik.
yeah.
They're all I mean, as far as like just pure like value offering.
Yeah,
What gives you the most for the money? They're unbeatable.
well, that's people seeking our expertise, right? So people are kind of
Sure.
talking to us. The difference is like scrolling through on Instagram, they're not looking for anyone's expertise, and when they show up for the match, unless they're directly talking to somebody,
Yeah.
or the best guy in their squad is shooting out a decked out M&P and crushing with it. Um, if they just see a bunch of guys with single action 2011s, what are they going to think that they're going to need for that
Yeah.
sport? Is that, and then they're going to go online. They're going to ask the guys, like, what's that? It's like, it's a staccato P something. And then they go online and say $4,000. I can't afford this sport. And so
Right.
it's like the guns that we allow in divisions, at least before, we could segment it out in a way that was, it's like, how much you spending on a gun? How many magazines do you have? Here's your division.
Right.
And then like,
Right.
and when you go there, everyone had guns that looked like yours. They had like better sights, and like maybe they had like magazine base plates that were a little different, but that was pretty much it.
Right.
And
True
so,
enough.
so, but 140 universal power factor, I would be all about, or 135.
130. I think 135 that's a good one because you're not pushing factory.
Yeah,
Um, and it's still well within the safety
but
margins of somebody not blowing something up.
the 9mm DQ list for low power factor ammo would grow substantially.
Substantially. I would enjoy that.
Because the old rule of 124 grains with 4 grains of tight group, or like, and people are like, we'll do 3.9 or 3.6 or 3.7. You start shooting on the chrono 124, 123.
You know what would probably also go away? People getting popper effed
Yeah,
because they
that
actually have some power behind that bullet now.
let's not change the calibration rules, and we'll just bump up the power factor. So
Yep.
anyway, thanks for downloading, listening, and subscribing. Thanks for Robert Wyatt for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to Tom Nelson for being here.
Oh yeah.
Is there any thanks for anyone else? I don't think there is. I hope they're having fun though. Hope one's sleeping well and the other one's having a great time. Anyways, thanks for doing all that stuff for Robert White and nobody else. I'm Tom Nelson, peace, love, and soul, as we depart into the open waters of the sea of life on a little tugboat we like to call the PARAcast.
Hasta la vista, baby. Good night, everybody. Toot toot.
Toot.